This month on Manor Park Classics we have a gorgeous little Mini 30, and it's scarcely believable today, but in the late 1980s the Rover group very nearly killed off the Mini. And it's this car, the Mini 30, that in many ways is responsible for the entire existence of the Mini brand today. You see, the year is 1980. The Austin Metro has just been launched, and for all intents and purposes that car replaced the Mini. Some people are a little bit ashamed to admit it, but it's true. Mini sales in 1980 fell off a cliff, and Metro sales came on, and it was one of the best-selling cars in Britain for the next 15 years. The Mini was now an orphan, its range severely culled down to just one engine, the 998cc A-Series, and just two quite meagre trim levels. There were a raft of special editions just to keep them moving out of the factory and out of the doors, but Mini sales had slowed to a crawl by this point. It was just an old car for people who might not have been able to afford a Metro. It was their economy offering. And for many years it seemed inevitable that within only a few years the Mini would die. However, 1987 is when things started to change. This was when Rover's upper echelons were considering killing off the Mini, but in Japan the Minis were selling really quite well. In fact, the Japanese Mini market was bigger than the British Mini market. And those of us with a very Anglo-centric view of the world might find that surprising, but Japanese society prioritizes new things. And the Japanese market was realizing that you could buy a brand new classic car and have a Mini. Therefore, it seemed natural that all the people who wanted a cool, brand new Mini also wanted it to feel like a car from the 60s, to have a little bit more performance than the little 998cc A-Series would have from the factory. As a result, a bloke named John Cooper, who you may well have heard of, came back into the fold. And with Janspeed, another really well-known Mini tuning company, they created a John Cooper tuning kit for the brand new 998cc Minis. It was sold officially through Japanese Rover dealers, and it came with a warranty. And the Japanese market absolutely lapped it up. So when the British market became aware that this existed, they all started lobbying Rover for this tuning kit. Eventually, Rover in the UK gave in and gave the market what it wanted, but the Mini was still very much an economy model. But the chairman of Rover at the time was a man named Graham Day, and his whole policy as leader of the Rover group was known as Roverization. And what that means is that they were going to drop the Austin mark and leave what they viewed as the mass market and move Rover ever so slightly more upmarket. Not to where it matched BMW or Audi, but just that cut above the mainstream. We see that in the early 90s with cars like the Rover 200 and Rover 600. But in this period, they started to look at the Mini with curious eyes and start to realize that the Japanese market know what these can offer, so why don't we jazz it back up again? By the mid-1980s, as I mentioned, the Mini had quite meagre trim levels, and it even lost all its chrome as well, going for black plastic components everywhere. Not particularly desirable when you're looking for a 60s throwback. But this Mini 30 is from 1989, and it was brought in to celebrate the Mini's 30th anniversary, as you might expect. But notice that this car has all its chrome. It has metallic paintwork, it has alloy wheels, and it even has half leather interior, which we will come back to because it's interesting in a very nerdy sense of the word. But this car was unlike any of the other Minis that had come and gone in the midst of the 1980s. This was something new, and it was Rover realizing what they had. In the same year as this, they launched cars like the Racing Green and the Flame Red, which were very gently sporting-oriented Minis. They still only had that little 998cc 40-odd horsepower A-Series engine, but they had the alloy wheels, and they had white roofs, and they had little checkered patterns across the cars. They had cool crayon seats as well. All things that just made a buyer in a Rover dealer turn and look at the Mini again and think, that's quite cool. The Racing Green and the Flame Red were really testing the water for what Rover came up with in 1990, however, because they decided to reintroduce the production Mini Cooper. The Mini Cooper died in 1971, but we associate it so heavily with the Mini as a brand, mainly because of what happened in the 1990s. Rover fitted a detuned MG Metro engine to it. They put white stripes on the bonnet, gave it a white roof, gave it the Mini 30s half leather seats, kept the cool alloy wheels and a brilliant colour palette, and decided the Mini Cooper was now back for good. In the 90s, the Mini took off again as an absolute cult icon, a classic car, as I said, that you could buy brand new. This was before BMW came on the scene, so when BMW did, the question was less about why are you still making this antique, and more a case of, can we profit off this? As a result, they then started developing the all-new Mini that of course launched in 2001, and that means that this car is kind of genesis in a sense for the chic image that the Mini brand has today. And isn't it so understated in doing so? But it's a Mini, and I love Minis. They are my favourite car of all time, but there's no point standing around and looking at Minis and talking about them philosophically. Let's just go for a drive and see why, in the late 80s and early 90s, people were still so willing to live with such an unrefined car. People were happy to deal with Minis because they are just endearing to drive. Yes, they're tiny, yes, they mean you can park anywhere and you can direct it so easily. But additionally, you sit over the steering wheel in a sense, which means it really wants you to grab it by the scruff of the neck. And the Mini's directness, the brilliant steering response, again adds to that feeling of what you want to give it. Then, of course, there's the iconic A-Series engine. It's only a little overhead valve lump, 40 brake horsepower there or thereabouts in this 998, but a Mini weighs less than 700 kilograms. And with its low revving, high torque nature, again, you want to grab it by the scruff of the neck. Back in 1959, the Mini was revolutionary with its rubber cone suspension, independent rear end with trailing arms, essentially double wishbone front end, and of course front engine transverse and front wheel drive. And Alec Izagonis, the man who was behind it all, decided he didn't want to build cars that were cheap to build. He didn't want to build cars that were just easy, affordable throwaway transport. Instead, he wanted to build cars that were absolutely spectacular. He was a man who did not compromise, and that led to his downfall in British Leyland later on. But with the Mini and a couple of its siblings, it meant they were absolutely riotous. Whenever I get in a Mini, and goodness knows one day I will own one, every single time I just want to steal it and take it home with me. It's all well and good having a nice, modern, refined car, but when you get in one of these and you feel the response of the chassis beneath you and how characterful the entire car is, you just cannot help but have the biggest smile on your face. They're just unbeatable. You cannot beat a Mini. And that's what people saw back in the late 80s, early 90s when these cars came out. Because the Mini, yet again, was now a little racing car for the road. There's a reason the Mini Cooper in its day in the 60s was so popular. There's a reason on its launch in 1959, all the Formula One drivers and engineers went crazy for it when John Cooper brought one into the paddock. And even as the 90s dawned, for getting around town, for using in a city, there is very little that can beat a Mini, warts and all. So with that, if you would like to get your hands on this absolute icon, and as far as I'm concerned, a very important car in the history of the British motor industry, then please do head over to the website and come and have a look at it too. It's joyous.